Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's taking a look at a really cool inventor's patent prototype of a safety mechanism for firearms in general, but specifically as applied to a U.S. military 1903 Springfield rifle. Now, this system is called the Gardiner safety, largely because that's what's written on the side. This was a patent that was applied for in 1904 and granted in 1909. The patent was actually applied for by a guy by the name of Orlando Scott from Ontario, up in Canada, but it was assigned to someone else by the name of Robert Gardiner, also from Ontario. And we can presume probably that Scott invented it, Gardiner financed it. That's often how this sort of thing works, although I don't have any specific information to back that up in this case. In fact, we really don't know anything about Scott or Gardiner. What we do know is he came up with this mechanism for basically blocking the sear in a firearm to render it even safer. Think of this sort of as a support hand grip safety. It's an interesting concept here. And the original patent basically says it's applicable to any firearm at all, basically anything that's breech loading. Now, I can see an application for this in hunting. It really doesn't strike me as a particularly suitable thing for the military, and in fact it was not adopted by any military that I'm aware of. One of the most interesting elements of this is the gun was built on a very early 1903 Springfield. This is a 1905 production gun. It was still in 30-03 when it was made. And the reason that a couple Canadian guys were able to get their hands on this is that in 1904, the US government had actually authorized the sale of 1903 Springfield rifles, which, remember, are absolutely cutting-edge, brand-new US military equipment. They'd authorized the sale specifically to inventors because the US military was very interested in supporting the civilian inventive community in coming up with ways to improve the rifle. And we would see that through the 1910s and 20s when a lot of private inventors tried their hand at ways to convert Springfields into semi-automatic rifles. And they were all able to do that with guns that they could purchase pretty darn cheap from the US government for testing. And so that's what we have here. It didn't even matter that these two particular inventors were Canadian. The US government was happy to send guns up there. This was before they were willing to sell the guns to, say, shooting clubs or the NRA. Anyway, the way that this safety works is basically we have these two scalloped panels. You can only see one, but there's one on the opposite side of the gun. And in order to cock the action or drop the striker, so to fire it or to recock the action, you have to hold these back. They're spring-loaded. They go about 1 centimeter back, about 1/3 of an inch. And if you don't hold that back, you can't fire the gun. Let me show you up close. Taking a look at the outside of the rifle, we have a bunch of distinctive features here. So, of course, we have these scalloped slats, I suppose, for lack of a better term, on the side of the fore-end on both sides, and these can be pushed back about, I don't know, about 1 centimeter, about 1/3 of an inch. Nothing on the bottom. The rifle itself is a pretty early base Springfield. It's got a Springfield Armory barrel with an 1905 date on it, and a US flaming bomb. So this was a military rifle that would have been sold to Scott and or Gardiner as inventors. There's the receiver marking. So serial number is 103,000 and change. That serial number places this gun as a 1905 production, of course matching the barrel, which means this is actually a 1903 Springfield in .30-03 caliber. And our rear sight here is indeed graduated for .30-03 ammunition before the pointed bullet of the .30-06 was adopted. Anyway, that's a little beside the point of the modifications that were made. Now, I've mentioned this before. If you want your inventive idea to be recognized and understood by people generations later, put your name on it. And Gardiner very helpfully did here. So they carved this quasi-fancy little inletted panel on the side of the rifle, marked it Gardiner safety, and the patent date, February 1909. It's interesting to note that the date line there is sort of inletted a layer below, or a level below, the Gardiner safety line, and I suspect this was originally a patent applied for, or something along those lines, because it was several years between when he submitted the patent and when it was actually approved. And I think he probably went back when it was approved, milled this down or carved it down with a little chisel, and then re-stamped it with the actual patent date once he had the patent. And lastly, we have a cutout right where the original cartouche was that shows the main working bit of the rifle. So when I pull the handguard back like so, you can see a little lever moving inside the rifle. Now, it's a little tricky to, I mean, I can tell you right now that that blocks the trigger from working, but in order to show you what it's actually specifically doing, let's go ahead and pull the rifle apart and get the stock off. So taking this apart, we can see the changes that were actually made, and they're remarkably not that complicated. So, in fact, the action itself is completely unmodified. Nothing at all has been changed here. What Scott, or Gardiner, did was to add this swinging block to the trigger guard, and then the more substantial modifications are in the stock itself. Of course, you can see the two serrated grasping surfaces from the outside. What he did there was carve out a block of wood on the inside of the stock connected to those. There is a spring here that is constantly pushing that block forward, and then a connecting rod that runs back, inletted in here into the side of the gun, so it runs alongside the magazine and the action, and then it comes back to just a bent L shape right there, and that bar connects into the hole in this. I can go ahead and attach the trigger guard and magazine without having the stock in place, so you can see exactly what this is doing. And basically, that spring-loaded, the spring in the handguard is pulling on that connecting rod, which attaches to this, which, when you're not deactivating the safety, pulls this block right up here, wedging it underneath the sear. So normally, when you fire, the trigger pulls that sear down, that releases the striker to fire, just like that. Well, if this is in the upward position and being held there, obviously, you can't fire it. Similarly, if we have that in the upward position and we try to cock the rifle, we're going to get to right there, and then this has to clear the sear, which requires pushing it down, and the safety here locks the sear in place. So if the striker is already cocked, you can cycle the bolt. But if the striker has been dropped, like it is here, you have to actually deactivate the safety in order to cock the rifle. So now, when we take another look inside the action there, through that little witness hole, now you can see exactly what's going on there, and hopefully it makes good sense. As I said earlier, I can see application for this for sporting arms and for hunting in particular, where this is a really good way to prevent a gun from firing when it was dropped, if it's susceptible to that in the first place. And it's not a bad thing if you're firing very deliberate, calm, not under stress, not under time pressure. As a military application, I don't think it makes any sense at all, because it's the idea that you have to have your support hand firmly on the front end of the rifle in specifically this position and holding pressure on it in order to recock the action in particular is not really conducive to military use. In addition, there are some interesting things, like if you have a dud round and the striker drops but doesn't fire, normally you can just grab the striker and recock it and fire a second time. And in 1905, this could still have been a thing, although we don't really have that kind of unreliability in primers today. However, in order to do that with Gardiner safety, you kind of need three hands, because you have to be holding the gun back here, you have to press the grip safety up here, and then you need a third hand to actually grab the striker and recock it. It's kind of just an operation you can no longer do with Gardiner safety. So it's a very cool idea. It's actually a remarkably simple idea for what it does, and I think Scott, the inventor, the guy who originally designed it and patented it, had a good mind for mechanical adaptation of the gun. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, and perhaps the most interesting thing about this today is the fact that it's built on such an interesting early example of the Springfield, and what that says about what the US government was doing with rifles and development at that time. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.